There are a lot of fake INFJs in this community, and in this video, we're going to go over an INFJ's traits and understand what truly makes them them. So let's get into it. A lot of people have a difficult time typing in the community. This is super normal. There's a lot of different people that are mistyped. Typing is very difficult, even with experts. It can get it wrong, and it can be very difficult to get right away. And INFJs, they're one of the most typed personality types, which just means logically, there's a lot of people who aren't actually INFJs who think they are. And there's many misconceptions about what INFJs are truly like. And some of these can lead to mistypings and the inaccurate tests, misinformation, all of this stuff can lead to people not knowing who they truly are. And it's really important to understand which personality type you really are, because there's a lot of amazing strengths of each personality type, and knowing the truth is very important. When it comes to INFJs, their intuition, their N, INFJs have introverted intuition, and it's their hero function. So this is their first function. They care a lot about their own wants, their own choices, their future, their hopes, their dreams, their freedom. They're all very individualistic when it comes to what they want, their intention. They're planning ahead. They're looking towards their future very hopefully. They're trying to understand what moves they're going to make, what choices they're going to make. I can do this, and then I can do this, and I want to do this because I want to do this because I want this. And they have a lot of reasoning around what they want. They're not necessarily very imaginative, coming up with tons of different scenarios and different ideas. They're very focused on their own future, and they're very focused on that. They're not necessarily going to be very flexible with what other people want to do. They kind of know what they want. They have their plan for the day, and if people come around with their own plans, it's going to mess them up. So this is kind of a misconception. They can be predictive. They always are looking towards the future, but they're really focused on predicting their own future and where they're going. That's their primary focus. And being manipulative, they're not necessarily going to be very manipulative, because they're more focused on what they're doing and where they're going, and they're not necessarily going to bother with what other people are doing. So this is a bit of a misconception. And they're not an extroverted intuition user, at least not primarily. It's their fifth function. So it's a little bit down in their cognitive function stack. So if you think a lot of these extroverted intuition traits, you might be an NE user. And when it comes to their feelings, their feeling function, INFJs have extroverted feeling parent. So it's FE. They care about other people's feelings, other people's worth, other people's values, other people's emotions, right? All the extroverted functions. They're not necessarily going to be focused on their own feelings. They actually have a very negative relationship often with their own worth, their own feelings. They're always trying to put other people above them, raise other people up, help other people in order to help themselves, make other people feel good in order to make themselves feel good. That's kind of their primary feeling function, their primary way of connecting with other people's emotions. And so they're not necessarily going to be super arrogant. They're not going to be self-important. They're not going to be head in the clouds thinking they're God, necessarily very, focused on that. They're not going to be evaluating things, figuring out whether or not they like something all the time, figuring out whether or not something's good or bad. It's just not their primary way of looking at it. They can sometimes struggle with being authentic to themselves. If they're around other people, they may see things that make other people feel good. They may agree with what other people like to be agreeable. They're not necessarily going to be very disagreeable when it comes to their opinions and their feelings, at least not around other people. When it comes to their judgmentalness, they can sometimes judge other people as being good or bad, but they're not necessarily going to judge themselves very highly. They may judge themselves very critically, very negatively with their FI critic. So INFJs are going to judge themselves quite harshly, and they're not an introverted feeling user, at least not primarily. They are an extroverted feeling user. So this is another thing that people sometimes misunderstand about INFJs, is that they're very emotional within themselves, which isn't exactly true. And then we have their thinking axis, their thinking function. INFJs have introverted thinking, and it's their child function. They care about their own thoughts, right? It's introverted, their own ideas, their own truth, their own logic. What they say is what I'm saying true. Does this make sense? Is this logical? Is this sensible? Is this smart? Because they're always trying to figure out a smart direction to go in and do what they want to do. And they're not necessarily going to be focused on what other people think necessarily. They're not always going to be very curious and reading up online. While INFJs can be curious, they can enjoy reading and learning new things. It's often because of other people around them. They're not necessarily going to do all that research themselves. They can sometimes just get stuck in their own kind of comfort zone with what they think, and think that they know pretty much everything they need to know until other people come around. And when other people come around with ideas, they will listen. They're not necessarily going to be like mean and closed-minded, but they're not always going to be, doing tons and tons of research on things. That's a bit of a misconception. That's more of a person with higher extroverted thinking and their extroverted thinking is their second last function, so it's not necessarily the main thing they're focused on. They're also not very focused on being famous, having a good reputation, being popular. That's more of a thing that an extroverted thinking user would have. So it's just not something INFJs care about. They don't care about being popular, famous. It's all kind of an inconvenience to them. They're not necessarily going to believe things or have self-belief or believe in the power of belief. It's more about just what's true or not. I don't care. And, they can be open-minded. They can sometimes be too open-minded, but they can also be very closed-minded sometimes. So that trickster kind of goes in any direction. But they're not necessarily going to have an easy time learning new things. They're going to have what they think, and they're going to have to process every new piece of information for quite a long time. So it can take a long time because they're not an extroverted thinking user, at least not primarily. So that's something to be aware of with INFJs. When it comes to their sensing functions, INFJs, they have extroverted sensing aspirational. They're trying really hard to make an impact on other people. They're really focusing on other people's good time, other people's experience, other people's memory, feedback, past. INFJs, of course, when they're alone, they can think about their past, but that's not their primary focus, is having a good experience themselves and being fulfilled internally. They really want to make a positive impact, make a difference on other people, give people a good experience, have a positive effect. And they're more focused on that extroverted sensing world. They're more observant of their external environment. They're more physical. They like to play sports, potentially. They may like to make jokes. They like to be, a little bit in the attention sometimes, not all the time. But they're not necessarily going to have a difficult time performing. While it is a fear of theirs, they can enjoy it as well. And so it's a bit of a misconception. While they may not like, necessarily doing a presentation or doing some kind of performance that's not by choice, they can sometimes enjoy showing people things if it's in a safe space. And they're less focused on things that an introverted sensing user would be focused on, things like comfort. They're not necessarily going to always have a comfortable experience, or their own health, or their own needs, or their own, their own past. They're going to kind of be focused on the future and kind of ignoring their experience, ignoring their needs, ignoring their health. They're not focused on who they're loyal to because they care about who's loyal to them. They don't care about who they trust because they don't trust people. They want people to trust them. And they don't really care about who they reject because they're more afraid of people rejecting them. So they don't necessarily figure out. So yeah, not necessarily focus on their own experience, more focus on other people. Because they're not an introverted sensing user per se. They're not necessarily focused on their own sensations. They're more focused on other people's. And yeah, INFJs, they're NF types, so that's often people do get that right. INFJs are people focused. They value their relationships. They value the future of their relationships. They can be very idealistic about it. And they enjoy being introverted, but they don't necessarily hate people. A lot of people think INFJs, oh, they hate people. They just want to be alone because they're better than everyone and smarter and everyone sucks. That's not really true. INFJs, they really value other people's opinions. They value other people's feedback. They really want to be accepted and loved by others. So it's very unlikely that they would necessarily hate people, at least not all people. INFJs, they don't really value themselves above others, or assume people are worthless. They kind of assume they're worthless. They may assume bad things about themselves, but they're not going to raise themselves above others emotionally necessarily, at least not a lot. They do love that external validation, and they have a very difficult inner world. It's a lot of turmoil in an INFJ's inner world. So they're not necessarily going to want to stay there their entire life. They're going to want to get out there and meet people. So yeah, INFJs, they're pretty rare personality type. There's not a lot of data to support that, but intuitives seem a little bit more rare. But whether they're rare or not, it's definitely something that is overtyped in the community. I think a lot of the community takes these tests, and it's very difficult to know if you're accurately typed. That's why we do typing at ontype.ch/advising. We do typing. If you're not satisfied with the results, we'll do another free consultation. We're really focused on getting an accurate typing, going through a really good system we have, and then talking with you afterwards as well if you're interested, and getting those accurate results. Because there's nothing wrong with mistyping. When I took the test first time, I was mistyped as an INFP, and so it's super common. It's really hard to get accurately typed online. But yeah, all the types are great and should be valued. So there's nothing wrong with being an INFJ or not being an INFJ. It's just, about understanding who you are and your unique strengths and being able to work on that and develop yourself. So thanks for watching. I hope this explains a little bit about, what makes up an INFJ and a little bit about some of the mistypes and misconceptions around that. And if you guys enjoyed, leave a like, comment, and subscribe down below as it helps the channel. And I hope you all have a great day.